Well, for more on corporate data security, I'm joined by George Washington University visiting scholar Allan Friedman. He's also the author of Cybersecurity and Cyberwar, What Everyone Needs to Know. Thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Now, Allan, we see that businesses and consumers are expanding their reach online. You have payment systems like PayPal, you have Apple Pay coming out. But then just on Thursday, JP Chase, 76 million household accounts and 7 million small business accounts hacked, one of the biggest corporate breaches, and even Home Depot, second largest retail data breach on record. So with all this connectivity and all these cybersecurity challenges, what should we be aware of? What should we look out for?
Well, there are just many different layers. One, if you run an enterprise, how do you secure things? On the other hand, if you're a consumer, your risks are different. You wonder, well, how will I be hurt? And starting with the consumer perspective, I'm not worried about someone stealing my credit card information or my bank information because under American law, I'm not liable. And so we have this model where liability is transferred onto those who might be in a position to protect it. So the political question there is who bears responsibility and are they in a position to actually implement security? Are the incentives aligned?
Now, how would you say the challenges have changed in terms of from a decade ago to the sorts of challenges we're facing now and in the future?
Well, everyone used to talk about security in terms of probability and magnitude. That's how you think about risk. Probability times magnitude. There's now an appreciation that the probability is 1. You're going to get breached. There's famously, we talk about one of the lines in cybersecurity, there are 2 types of security officials in a company. There are those that know that they've been breached and those that are ignorant that they've been breached because everyone's been breached. And the question is how to react. We need to get an appreciation that it's not a question of how do you build a single wall around yourself, but how do you protect what's really important and how do you respond? The code word here is resilience.
Now, companies seem to be aware of these risks, but they're focusing more on the response side than the prevention side. Almost 50% of companies say they've experienced some sort of breach. Now, what can companies do to alleviate these concerns? And why aren't companies doing more in the prevention phase?
Well, we have a couple of things. One, just prevention is really, really hard. There are so many ways that an attacker might get in, especially an attacker that's determined to go after you. This isn't an attacker that's going after any low-hanging fruit. They've said, I want to get into your system, I'm going to work very hard, and I have resources, and I'm patient. So if you can't prevent someone from getting in, then the next question is remediation. But the other approach is there's an old law, it's almost a decade old in the United States, of data breach notification that said, listen, if there is data that's breached that applies to consumers, you just need to tell them about it. And that led to the growth of an industry to respond. How are you going to first pay for notification, and then what are you going to do to make people happy? And that led to a response focus.
Now, what sort of role should companies play in protecting? Should companies do more? Should the government step in?
Well, that depends. I view risk as there's 2 types of risk. There is the risk that a company themselves is worried about facing. And for there, we need to make sure that there are incentives aligned to say that the company is making the decision that is socially optimal. You don't want to invest too much in security. It's possible to spend a lot of money and not make yourself or your customers better off. That's different from the systemic risk of what happens if we wake up tomorrow morning and banks have just decided, you know what? Online banking brings too much risk to our house, so we're just going to turn it off. That would be devastating to the economy. Policymakers need to be aware of that, and they need good information to understand how is the risk growing to affect all of us rather than just a single company or a single customer. You're not trying to get rid of all crime. You're trying to make sure that people still feel safe to walk down the street.
Now, some data estimates that most mid to large companies use hundreds of these cloud apps. Most of them weren't actually brought in by the company's tech department. So what should companies be doing? Should they be having more of their own in-service, their own company protection? What should they do?
I think the cloud question is a red herring. If you look at it, one way to look at it is, well, there are a very small number of cloud companies, and they're really focused on security. What is the chance that your in-house team is going to be better than Google, better than Amazon? The risk comes not in storing things at the cloud, but in all of the small pieces that you have to put in place to get your company's systems to work with the cloud. And that leaves, the more times you have systems that connect up, the joints between those interconnections is where the risk lies.
And so just to wrap up, if you did have just one quick key piece of advice for corporations moving forward as we get more connected, what would it be?
Security is an organizational question. You need from the board level on down to understand resilience, how you can adapt, and be aware that efficiency is often the enemy of security.
Allan Friedman, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.